through the medias, and Bulgaria is a country which is quite hostile against refugees. And now I meet this wonderful person as the postman. So thank you, Filatsudi. I invite the second panelist to join me on the stage, Aristide Desbaltas.
Bonsoir, Monsieur le Ministre.
Good evening, Sir, Mr. Minister. Former Minister of Culture in 2015, who was ousted by the government Tsipras. You are a philosopher, you are a physicist, and you also all these. When you are a philosopher of sciences, we are far from these sciences. But what is your reaction to this film? I completely agree with FI. I have the same reaction. I would add two things. The first thing is the Bulgarian landscape is very similar to the Greek landscape. The faces are very similar to the Greek faces, and the atmosphere in the village during the elections was about similar as in Greece. I think it's approximately everywhere, maybe different with different nuances. And second thing I wanted to add is that it's something which is given by history, a very strange symmetry. So you see this dying village, part of the people, of an inhabitant of a little bit different civilization come to this place as to repeat this huge flow of migration in a wider world. So you have this human level, you have this everyday level, then you have this level of civil disobedience, but you have also this historical level. And so the question of the quality of the politicians we need to face those big issues, historical issues. Yes, but we are the voters, and Mrs. Merkel doesn't say anything else when she said we have to rescue Germany with the refugee. So another person should have been here, Mr. Cédric Héroux. He had a passport which is obsolete, so he has been tried. He has spent quite a few hours in jail, but he's still hopeful. We have other examples in Switzerland because Cédric Héroux was spoken of in the media. So I invite a third person on the stage. There is a similarity between the film and Cédric Héroux because he is always, please Gabriel, take a seat. He is also in a hilly landscape where the border is moving constantly. Good evening, Graziella de Coulon. You are a representative of the collective AIR, which is you are a well-known person of amongst you are fighting for the rights. Collective AIR like refuge, resistance. Disobedience, disobedience too. It starts with D, disobedience.
Ça commence par
D.
Ah oui, mais on peut, il y a aussi des R, ça finit par R.
You have also R's in this word. So disobedience, to have the courage to remain faithful to values, in order to defend human lives. And Filatsudi says exactly the same thing, so that Europe isn't a Europe of politics, politics and police, and this is part of the debate. We see in the film a car with Swiss numbers. So the Swiss border forces are taking part to this effort of keeping the borders, and they collaborate with all the people being at the border of Europe. So we first, Graziella de Coulon, disobedience means being in a lawless. So what is the thing which makes you vibrate? What gives you the courage to disobedience? Because if you think of disobedience, you also think of obedience. If you are disobeying, so you obey to something else, to other laws which are much more important than the laws which have been voted upon by the Swiss people. So I feel completely comfortable in this sense. Those laws are more universal laws. Yes, they are more. They are laws which have to do with the relation between the people. They have to do with life, because there is no relation between the people. Anna Arendt would say the same thing. If you want to keep this link between the people, you have to choose the laws you want to obey to. And I feel more comfortable with myself also, with your own value, because you remain truthful to your value. How many refugees are you receiving? You are in the Church of Montgré because the Church of Saint-Laurent has put you on the street. We occupied the Church of Saint-Laurent. We had to do this action, to take to this action, because we had done all what we could before, so that our government, the government of the canton of Vaud, does something for the persons who are submitted to the Dublin rules, so that they don't send them back in a country like Italy. I don't want to criticize Italy, but when we started with our refuge, there was a huge amount of refugees in Italy, and Switzerland would systematically send back the people who managed to cross the border under this Dublin treaty. So Switzerland has the possibility to say no, because you have this sovereignty clause. A state may decide to keep some refugees in his country if they pass through other countries. Switzerland is very easy. Either you come with a parachute or you come through another country. So it's how can we not react to this expulsion of many refugees who come after crossing the desert, the sea, and all the ordeal they have been through without emotion, just sending them back. And even the population at that time, the population who was crying a lot after seeing all these refugees on the sea, dying on the sea. Then they didn't react anymore. But we had to occupy the church, because in spite of the petitions and everything we tried to change, we have been discussing with the churches and asking them, do you agree with us? We are going to protect the refugees and give us a place. They said no, so we occupied the church. And then we stayed 1 year in this church. So this disobedience was something we had to do. Until you were ousted of this church. But there were just a few bosses who decided so, because the people of the let us remain of the parochia, but we have won in the case because we fight in the tribunal. But we was received by another church. We went to the Catholics. We were at first with the Protestants, and then we went to the Catholics. So it's true that the churches have a long tradition of receiving and protecting human lives, not only the refugees, but in general the. So you are resistant, Graziella de Coulon. You refuse laws which are unjust. Filazzudi, you didn't disobey all the time. You have to. And I completely agree with what Graziella said. You have to choose. You have to decide whether you abide the law or not, or do what is legal for us, morally speaking, concerning your value, the universal values like solidarity, humanity, values you cannot forget, and also human rights. You cannot choose to forget the right to receive asylum. This is a thing which a lot of European countries try to deny most of the refugees. Did you have problems with the authorities, with the Greek authorities? I started 10 years ago in this movement of solidarity, and we have been threatened very often by the police, by the authorities. But for me, it's a path I have to follow, I have to do it, and you have to somehow breach the law. PIPCA was illegal for the authorities in the beginning. It was not a work, we had just a keys through the authority, but it was illegal because there were no police forces. Now, also, they repeat that. It's not legal. There is no police forces. It's not a detention center. So the whole movement of solidarity, of which we are very proud of, if it hadn't been for 2015, with this huge wave of refugees, it was completely illegal to go on the coast and help the refugees, or go into the sea and help the refugees. It was illegal. You go to jail for that. And that is something, if you are allowing you outlaw, you go to prison. You took part to the government of Cyprus. You are MP now. Was it for you an easy thing to accept that the citizens show solidarity because the state didn't have the means to receive all these refugees? This law, nobody didn't even think about this law at that time, as if this law didn't exist. So we just let it be. But it's a bit more complicated. I completely agree. Would you please speak in the microphone, because it's going to be difficult to hear. I completely agree with what you just said. You breach the laws because you don't speak in the microphone. It's not a law. It's an invitation. I would say the following. You have a contradiction between law and right and justice. That comes from the time of Greek tragedy. Justice is always it prevails on law. In the best of the cases, the law follows the justice. Usually, it doesn't come to justice, but as for the issue concerning the refugee, one forgets justice and not the law. And sometimes you can reach justice because you obey to the law. But otherwise, you can disobey a law which seems unjust. Yes. Because the law generally is based on equality and justice. For justice, you have this question of freedom, and we are all different. So the equality before the law in a conflict doesn't take into account the difference of the situation of the people, the situation from which the refugee come, and so we can have this problem in a more theoretical way with arguments. How do you see the role of the state? It's different. For instance, cruel questions which is being discussed in Greece presently is the question of the issue of the figures of the numbers, because in an island as Lesbos, when you have so many refugees that they are overwhelming and they go further than the capacity of the inhabitants, they exceed the capacities of inhabitants. So, but you have problems between the refugees and between the refugees and the Greeks. So, on political level, the only solution in such a big problem is to distribute the refugees in the country and in Europe. For instance, in Greece, you have more than the quota which has been decided by the EU. Same thing in Italy. For us, it's enough. The number of refugees we have, we can receive them and have a situation which is going to improve. We have more or less solved the problem of the education of the children. The children can go to school where the camps are. But if you have a new flow, a new wave of refugees, as the last one, where you have thousands of people coming, it's a problem in South Italy. This is a political issue, as I said before. It depends on the quality of the European leaders. What can they do confronted to such a problem, which is an additional problem to the whole situation? I think there is also a historical culpability from the Western world towards least developed countries, and this comes from the colonial time that leads to this continuous wave of migrants to Europe, to the developed countries, to the so-called rich countries, but whose wealth is also the wealth of their country of origin. But you have only a small amount of the population who feel this culpability, saying, okay, we are feeling this guilt. No. So, Graziella de Coulon, you have some problems because the Canton Vaud has become harder to send back the refugees. So your fight is going. Do you continue with the disobedience? Yes. We are asking ourselves, it's not because of us that they have become harder. The more we do something, the more they try to repress and to suppress. And the noise of the boots in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning in front of my door, and we can imagine what it is for the refugees who are being taken like that. We are go on fighting. We are maybe inventing also new means, occupying other places, trying to broaden the amount of people who are supporting us, because you have a lot of people who, in silence, help the refugees. We wanted to voice, to put them forward so that they are visible, to tell they are here. But when they are in the shelters, they are protected and nobody is going to help them. But we have been rescuing about 150 persons in Bulgaria and Italy, and 150 persons have a B permit, residence permit. So we have achieved some results, but it's not enough. And you have always the state who could move more, which could do more, but and doesn't anything. But at the same time, you don't don't have only a state, a democratic state, as Switzerland, a so-called democratic state. You have also to have citizens who are involved, who say no. It's not only the state who has to act. In the film, I've seen the same thing in here. The migration issue is hostage of an electoral policy. We are going to have elections in Canton. We see this in Europe with Merkel. We have seen in this little village. It's incredible. This is something which has to stop. We must be the people who make Switzerland, the civil society. We must react.
So, well, to disobey, there's a question about it. I mean, you are for it, of course, and FIFDH as well. But so again, what's going to be the repercussions? I mean, the more solidarity you're going to have, the more people are going to disobey, the more repercussions you're going to have. But it's not going to stop Orbán in Hungary or Marine Le Pen in France. Or in what's happening in the Netherlands. So when will you have enough people disobeying for policies to change? So you've talked numbers. So I think that one shouldn't think in terms of numbers, because that's a trap one shouldn't fall into. Now, all the rhetorics is based on numbers. So, and on threats. I'm not talking about the number of refugees. I'm talking about the number of people who are willing to disobey. And so when is it going to actually have repercussions on the way on the elections? I mean, like in France, not voting for Marine Le Pen. Well, difficult to tell, but I have... I've experienced solidarity, and for me, solidarity is a contagious phenomenon. And when we started this camp in Lesbos, the citizens of Lesbos, I mean, they were right in the middle of the economic crisis, and they did react, and they were rather negative at the beginning. Why are they here? Who are they? What are they coming for? And how are we going to? Will we be able to help them or not? And when we started, there were many of us wanting to help. Everybody was out there wanting to help, and they were proud to help. And so it actually changes people's minds, because people's minds are sort of forged by the media, and all you read in the media is the people are criminals, and they're going to represent a threat to our livelihood. And so, but when people start identifying with the refugees, I think that's when there's a change in the mindset. I'm not saying that happens everywhere, and that we're going to find, the answers and saying, oh, all is fine and well, it's a bed of roses, there's solidarity. No, it requires a lot of planning, and you need, a global plan, and you need to think in terms of sharing responsibility, and everyone needs to participate. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it is possible. And it starts by awareness. And Graziella de Coulon. So where will the solutions come from? I mean, Cédric would have said it if he were. It's not going to come from politicians. It'll come from the citizens. And then I'll give you the floor, Mr. Baltas. I don't know where the solutions are going to be found, but you certainly have to go looking for them. And you were saying earlier on that it's not going to stop Marine Le Pen. Or yes, I mean we're accustomed to see the majority win, but we have to keep shouting to defend our values. Shouldn't we listen to the people who are scared, who feel threatened, who don't want solidarity, and who are voting for non-solidarity programs? Yes, we need to listen to them. We need to understand them, but again, I mean, people will tell us, "Oh no, refugees, no, my neighbor, yes," because it's the only they only know their neighbors. So we have to make the connection, and people have to actually, get out of the bunkers and meet people, and that's how people's mindset is going to change, and then they won't be afraid of them, because there's a problem that the other is always going to raise fears. So we're going to ask the last question before giving the floor to the audience. Last question to our philosopher, Mr. Baltas. From a philosophical standpoint, there is a problem with our rapport versus the other. And basically, what we hear, it's we have them and we have us, and us, we come first. And this is all based. This concept is based on fear, and it's quasi-official, this attitude, which of course encourages people to feel fear. And the problem of refugees is multidimensional. What I mean is that people who come to Europe, I mean, refugees don't come to actually make us empathetic, but again, I talked about actually all the European countries welcoming or taking in the refugees. And there's also a cultural issue in fear. I mean, fear provides votes for the extreme right, and the idea of who the other is linked to that. I mean, the other is different, so of course, and because he's different or she's different, it's a threat. And despite the fact that the issue of terrorism has nothing to do with the refugees. I mean, there's no danger that there's going to be terrorists amongst the refugees that are hiding amongst the refugees. I mean, this is practically doesn't exist. And of course, fear is linked to the issue of terrorism and Islam. So all of this leads to raising hurdles versus solidarity movements. So we need to grasp all this complexity and work on each dimension of the problem. And what I was trying to say earlier is that there's actually a given anthropological factor. You have, freedom, equality, fraternity. Fraternity, what is it? It is that solidarity. That's what's missing or what's lacking today. I mean, we have, hospitality has been practiced in all civilization. I mean, every civilization, will actually help others who are in need. And you have to take into account all the dimensions of the problem, one after the other, of the reasons, every reason for the fear. So you have arguments for each of these factors, but the last argument, the supreme argument, is that the other is sacred. The other is sacred. So at the very basis of what we call the Western civilizations are Homer's text, and again, the other, the one who comes from another country is sacred, and we must actually welcome him in our home, wash him, feed him, offer him a roof. And it's only if he wants is to ask the question, what's the reason of you coming here? This is the very basis of Western civilization. That's what I'm saying, that the issue of solidarity, hospitality, is an anthropological factor that we find in all civilizations. It's a given from an anthropological standpoint. So if we were to go to their country, they would do the same thing. But we went there more to plunder their homes. Leoluca Orlando said he felt ashamed of being European, and that politicians were extremely selfish, and that what's behind the law is economic selfishness or political selfishness. So who would like to ask a question? Madam.
En réalité, c'est pas une question, si vous permettez.
So, in fact, it's not a question, but if you'll allow me, I just like to launch an appeal, an association that the Collectif Air knows. It's to fight the blind implementation of the Dublin rules, and you can all sign solidarity.tattes.ch, and thank you for disseminating this appeal. We've got 3,000 signatures, and we want to go to the State Council, the Federal Council, and we're hoping for 10,000 signatures, so we need you all. This is an appeal. Okay, we hear you.
And so,
Latsoudi, you see people in Switzerland also are active. I'm very happy and very enthusiastic, because this is the only thing that gives us hope, and it's very powerful. And we experienced this in Lesbos with international solidarity. And so every time when I travel, it's a world that's completely different from the world of threats and fear. And I meet people everywhere in Europe who have the will to give and to maintain a human face of Europe, and this is extremely important. And it's
question migratoire,
Madam.
Oui,
yes.
Merci.
Thank you.
À toutes ces interventions. J'avais une question par rapport aux accords de Dublin.
I wanted to ask you something about the Dublin agreements.
Qu'est-ce que vous préconisez?
So what do you suggest? I mean, if several associations,
quelle est l'importance du mouvement citoyen
qu'on
peut éventuellement développer
what can citizens
pour changer les accords de
in
Dublin?
order to
Est-ce que c'est
modify the
imaginable?
Dublin agreements? I mean, is this a possibility?
C'est pas seulement imaginable, c'est souhaitable.
Okay, not only is it,
Maintenant, comment y arriver?
we can picture it happening, but more than that, it's desirable. When we opened a shelter, I was certain, considering what had happened in the other countries, and especially in Italy, that in 2 months' time we would have changed everything, and that was 2 years ago. So we saved a few, but on the other hand, the Dublin agreements are still there, and they are becoming more and more strict. We have Dublin 2, Dublin 3, and we're expecting Dublin 4. That is practically going to, I don't know what's left as solutions for the refugees. And these agreements were adopted by the rich countries to get at the poor countries, and the poor inside Europe. Now it's the poorest countries who have to deal with the problem, and how to get them changed, I don't know. And where we live, we need to make changes there. And Europe has to actually, I think perhaps something, a body higher than Europe should say, you can't do this. Migration is not going to change. The world has changed, so why do we keep our eyes shut? And you have to live with the people who are coming. And just as well, I'm dreaming of a continent where, and you know, and we're together, and that's my dream to have. Because frankly, that is the future, and we continue. We're totally blinded, and we want to close. We can't stop stop migration, all the better. You could regulate it. You can regulate it. I mean, Aristide Baltas said that things are getting much more complicated because of the numbers. Your vision is a little bit idealistic. So it may be idealistic. I mean, that's what everybody tells us. I mean, just as well that you have people who still have ideals and want to pursue these very ideals. So what I think is that even those who arrive and those who've been accepted temporarily, they are treated as subhumans without any rights afforded to them. But if we consider them as citizens, these people will come and work and live with us, and then perhaps they'll go back to the countries. I mean, no one's dreaming to come and live in another country for the rest of their life. That's not their goal. It's because they can't live in their country momentarily, but when things are better, they want to go back to their country. So I believe the more those who come to ask us help, if we actually consider them as fully fledged citizens and we give them rights, they actually won't actually be a burden. Quite the contrary. I mean, Switzerland. I mean, if we haven't seen migration, is because we're still on the top of the mountain and eating our cheese. And some anthropologists say who've thought about the issue of migration, and Mr. Lagier said that we leave the migrants by the roadside, and if we open up the borders, if they were, we would probably have less refugees, because once we let them in, then they're free to go back. Someone who wants to ask a question. I have a question to the former minister, Mr. Aristide Baltas. So again, something quite contradictory. Angela Merkel was ferocious with Tsipras's government, especially as regards to the debt. But there's something quite contradictory, because Angela Merkel received 1 million migrants, and her discourse was highly humanistic. And Tsipras, I heard his speech, it's a somewhat similar one. So people who are opponents in their politics vis-à-vis the refugees have a pretty similar discourse. So why did the Tsipras government seize this occasion to get Angela Merkel? Didn't you succeed in finding, an agreement? I don't know quite how to call it, but I'd like to have your opinion. So yes, and to find common grounds in the field of morals as opposed to politics. So I have this image on the phases of influx of migrants in Greece. Before the Tsipras government, there were small waves of migrants, and at the time the government wanted to actually push them back. And if they were able to get to Athens, they set up camps. And they were kept like prisoners. And when the Tsipras government came to power, they changed all of this. And at the same time, the influx of refugees from Turkey started growing in numbers. And the most wanted to actually cross Greece but not stay there. And the fact that approximately 1.5 million refugees crossed through Greece without nobody knowing about it, and nobody created problems. It was a miracle at the time. So then there was a time when the roads were closed in the northern part of Greece. That was the story everybody heard about it, and where it's impossible to cross. And there was a very large camp in the northern part of Greece. Well, when the problem got more and more serious, even though the residents didn't have a problem with this, so that camp had to be evacuated, but people didn't want to leave. There were also traffickers who said, tomorrow, next day it'll open, I know a path, you can go this way or that. But the second miracle, 2 months, 3 months later, the camp was opened. Then the problem of the islands. At the beginning, there was a spontaneous movement of solidarity, incredible, right in the midst of the crisis. And people, who actually were housed in the villages, quite unbelievable. And yes, and you saw the war of the life vests. Yes. But when the numbers of refugees in the islands, there were as many migrants as residents, and then we became aware that there was a problem, and we tried to actually send them to other places. We sent them to Germany, but so Europe forbids us to do this now. We can't evacuate the islands. We wanted to send them to other places. And then there was the agreement signed with Turkey. From an ideological standpoint, I don't like the content of the agreement, but there's an agreement which at least puts pressure, regulates. So the agreement is due to the fact that, so it's based on the fact that all European countries would find solutions, and all the Eastern Europe countries don't have any. So Germany at the beginning took in quite a few refugees, but seems to have stopped now. So it is a very important international problem, a political problem, because there's also the issue of power. And you said the northern countries, don't want to take people coming from Greece, and they have the power to send them back. But you're not answering the question. The gentleman's question was, Angela Merkel puts pressure on Greece because she has because of the debt, the Greek debt, and supporting austerity plans. But she takes in refugees. So it was a positive type of force, but other countries more to the left, like France, they didn't actually do their part, and they caused problems, etc. So this is what they said. And if it's impossible not to do it, to face up to the refugee problem. So this is, in a way, it's extremely cruel. And on the islands, where there was these movements of solidarity at the beginning, again, if it exceeds the capacity, then you get the reverse problem, and it becomes chaotic, and nothing new about that. And between the Greek and the refugees, etc. Madam. Yes, good evening. Thank you, Graziella. I just wanted to say one word. Let's stop talking about migrants, waves of migrants, influx. There's no such things as refugee influx. There's a problem with solidarity. The problem is a political one. So in 2015, we took in 1 million asylum seekers out of 500 million people living in the European Union. So basta, stop it, please. It's true that words are not innocent, but the media effect is that these words kept being repeated. I agree. Next question. Yes, sir. Hold on. Wait till you get the microphone. Yes. Hello. Good evening. I just wanted to ask a question on Erdogan, and he is threatening to actually cancel this agreement, which is there to solve the migrant problem. If Erdogan cancels or resiliates the agreement, what's going to happen? Turkey's takes in migrants in conditions that are quite questionable, but at least Turkey is there. But what will happen? I mean, he's threatening to actually resiliate the agreement. I mean, is it a good agreement? And what about in Greece as well? Yes, Aube Dorée. Yes, you know about that movement. Yes. Extremist. Yes, Mr. Mr. Minister, Aube Dorée. Okay, it's not a threat. I'm very proud of my country. And very solidary. So this, we're talking about the Golden Dawn. Yes, despite Golden Dawn. And it was something that was unbelievable. Greece was already in the midst of the crisis, poverty, rampant poverty, but even the most conservative newspapers and the conservative parties saw this solidarity coming from the bottom and being happening all over the country. So it obliged all the political parties. It forced them to actually act in a solidary way. So that's the very basis, the solidarity. And we will do everything possible, even if there are many more refugees coming to our countries. And we want to convince other European countries to do what they should be doing. But we don't want to be the victims of a policy that goes against what the refugees want themselves. They don't want to remain in Greece. I mean, more than half of the refugees who are in Greece want to leave. They want to go to other European countries. They have other destinations in mind. And so apparently there's a process regulated by the United Nations on how those who want to leave and join their families, how they can do this. And there's a bureaucracy. It's not an innocent bureaucracy, not at all. And the only thing I really want to insist upon is that in a country that has not been subject to this problem of having hundreds of thousands of people coming in every day, and for the people who haven't had that experience, so they must do what you are doing. I mean, I found this festival incredible. I mean, in Geneva, there are people who are actually concerned about this issue, and with this unbelievable organizational team behind all of this, and to be able to expose one's ideas and to raise awareness everywhere. This is extraordinary, and that helps solve the problem. But since you haven't really, there are a few islands, you haven't had the same experience. What people are, the islanders are experiencing. I hope you won't have to. And if they do the minimum, they won't meet that type of problem. And they should take in refugees, and we can learn from these people many important things for our lives, and not because we're philanthropists. So thank you. Regarding Erdogan, how far? I mean, with Erdogan, should we make a compromise? Absolutely not. I mean, I think we've gone already too far. I mean, if he puts an end to the agreement, it's going to be very complicated. There's no reason why we should sign such agreements. No, there are other solutions, And already, if the agreement is resiliated, Europe should never have done what it did, and which is to negate its responsibilities. And now, I'm sorry that there's no possible compromise, and we have to understand once and for all that the migrants. I don't like this word migrants because it means it's someone who is leaving. I mean, they are human beings, and so it's according to what we do or don't do that we actually have an impact on their dignity. And so they've stripped these people from dignity, and they should have actually taken responsibility for these people. Still, a few questions. It's getting late. Yes, I'm sorry. Now, because this agreement, it's a monstrous agreement, and at the end of the day, we're talking about the threat of the numbers. We're not talking about what's the problem of losing one's values, one's morality, and a political choice that gives power to Erdogan, and that he's going to start playing with the numbers of refugees, and so refugees are in dire straits, and they don't know what's going to happen to them. And they have rights. I mean, they're put behind bars. There are Syrians who are in prison, and they're being told that they're going to be sent back to Turkey. I mean, the right to asylum, the asylum right. I mean, it's I mean, it's just the numbers. It's the asylum right that's being jeopardized here. So, yes, you have the microphone. Yes, good evening. So, okay, again, I don't want to put salt on the wound, but so I wanted to ask you about the situation in Greece in relation to all the people who sometimes are being exploited. I mean, we've seen this happening, unfortunately. Okay, again, as I said, I'm adding some salt on the wound. I'm sorry, as we saw what happened in Spain, where sometimes they don't have any ID papers, and they're being exploited, as is happening in the United States as well. I think that's what happens to many migrants across the world. So here's my question. So this situation that that exists in Spain and Italy as well, because these are the countries that are impacted by these influxes. So the situation in Greece, is it similar? So the other side of solidarity, of the coin of solidarity. So Mr. Baltas, so in Greece, about 60,000 and a few refugees. For most of them are living on the islands in different places. They're free, of course, to move around. And there's been efforts being made to house them in the best possible conditions. We haven't been able to solve the problem for all the refugees, and there are still problems on the islands where some of the refugees are still living under tents and not in hard brick houses. And the problem, due to bureaucratic reasons, they have to remain on the islands for the time being. I don't know the percentage the number of people they can actually take in. The other countries, I'm sure that Greece has exceeded the number. But what about exploiting the people who are there? In Europe, if all the countries were to participate in taking in refugees coming from Syria and also Afghanistan and other countries. But for it to be possible, then each country should have said, fine, yes, I will take in so many. And then you got to go fast in terms of formalities, and so that people then, are sent to where they want to go. That's the general view. And then the agreement that was signed with the European Union and Turkey, I don't like it at all. I mean, we have the agreement is very difficult to implement. But for those people who are in Greece or in other European countries and who must return to Turkey, there's a very serious problem for these people. But I don't know how another agreement can come about where we'll start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, okay, unless, we see the end of the war in Afghanistan and Libya and Syria. That is why I'm saying that the problem is extremely complex with many different dimensions, and I think each country should look at the problem and again, no country can find the solutions on its own. And it's not for these small organizations to solve the problem at the European level. So I know that many of you still wanted to ask questions, and you're going to feel somewhat frustrated, but time is running by, and the organizers of the festival, want me to close this debate. So migration, a time for disobedience. So I think each and every one of us should ask ourselves that question. Thank you very much for participating in the debate.
Et j'invite sur scène Philippe Motta.
Merci, Oui, effectivement, cette édition se clôt. Merci de votre présence.
Thank you for this, for your presence. I'm going to
cette 15e édition 2017, et je salue la présence ici
this
du fondateur du
15th
festival,
edition,
Léo
and I would like to greet
Merci,
the
Léo,
founder of the
démarrer ce
festival,
festival.
Leo Kahneman,
Nous ne serions
to
pas
thank
ce
him.
soir
If you
ici.
hadn't created this festival, we wouldn't be here
Pour vous
today
donner,
evening.
très
So
brièvement quelques chiffres,
just
c'est
to
quand même,
give you a few
300
figures,
invités, 70
300
pays.
hosts,
C'est une énorme logistique.
160 countries. It's a
microphones ne
huge
s'allument pas
logistic.
tout seuls,
Those
ces taux
microphones
n'arrivent pas
do
sur le
not work
plateau tout
alone.
seuls. Il
Those
faut que
tables
les
do
caisses
not come on the stage
encaissent, il
by
faut que les
themselves.
portes
The
s'ouvrent,
money
il faut que
doesn't
les
go in the
traducteurs
cases.
traduisent.
The
Et
interpreters have to
j'emprunte à l'industrie du
translate,
cinéma,
and
c'est d'aider des crédits à la
this
fin
is,
des films,
I
c'est
like
nous qui défilons.
to take from
Si
the
vous avez un badge
movie industry
qui dit
this
festival,
idea
je
of
voudrais que
credits. So
rejoignez-moi
if
sur
you have
scène.
a badge
J'ai envie, moi, de
of the
vous
festival,
applaudir très
come
fort,
on the
de
stage,
vous
because
remercier
I
au
would
nom
like
de
to give
toute
you a
l'équipe.
warm applause and to thank you on behalf of the whole team of the organizers.
Ne soyez pas timide.
Don't be shy, come on the stage.
Bravo. Merci. Les bénévoles, les
Thank
volontaires,
you,
tous
all
ceux
the
qui œuvrent à ce
volunteers and the
festival,
people
sans qui il ne
having
serait pas possible.
contributed to
Je
this
ne fais pas
festival,
le nom. Merci,
with
c'est un
whom
plaisir
it
et
wouldn't
un
be
honneur d'être parmi
possible.
vous.
Thank
Merci.
you. It's a pleasure and an honor being amongst you.
Bravo. Bravo. Merci. Isabelle Gatiker.
Isabelle Gatiker,
Allez,
please come on the
Isabelle.
stage as well.
Merci. Merci
Thank
infiniment. On vous donne rendez-vous en 2018. Merci de votre
We see you
générosité
in
et de votre présence.
2018.
Merci.
Thank you for your
Merci.
generosity and for being here.
Bonne soirée, bonne fin de dimanche.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.